A billionaire CEO who controlled everything, except what she wanted most. A single father who had already buried one future and wasn't about to sell another. What happened between them was never supposed to happen. But on the worst night of the year, when the rain came down hard enough to flood the streets and a woman in a soaked designer coat knocked on the wrong door, everything changed. This is the story of two people who had every reason to walk away and couldn't. Watch until the end. Hit like and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The rain started somewhere around 9 o'clock, and by 10 it had turned ugly. Logan Reed was on his hands and knees under the kitchen sink when he heard the first crack of thunder shake the windows. He had a flashlight clenched between his teeth, a wrench in his right hand, and a slow leak that had been dripping into the cabinet for 2 weeks because he hadn't had a spare hour to deal with it until now. The water pipe was corroded at the joint, something he should have caught months ago, and the repair was going to take longer than he wanted it to. He didn't mind the work. Honestly, he preferred it to sitting still. "Dad," his daughter's voice came from the hallway, small and cautious in that particular way she had when she was trying not to bother him. "The power went out on my tablet again." Logan pulled himself halfway out from under the sink and took the flashlight from between his teeth. Mia was standing in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, the yellow ones with the cartoon foxes. Her hair a little tangled from sleep she hadn't quite settled into yet. She was 6 years old and looked exactly like her mother in the eyes, which was something Logan had stopped letting himself think about too often. "Did you plug it in like I told you?" "I forgot." "Then go plug it in." "But I was in the middle of a video." "Mia." She made a sound that wasn't quite a whine and wasn't quite a sigh and turned back down the hallway. Logan listened to her footsteps pad across the floor and disappear into her room. He put the flashlight back between his teeth and went back under the sink. The house was small, 3 bedrooms if you counted the one he'd converted from a storage room when Mia was born, and it sat on a narrow lot at the edge of Ridgeline, a neighborhood that had been working class for 30 years and had only recently started attracting the kind of buyers who used words like potential and up and coming. Logan had bought it 4 years ago, after everything fell apart, because the price was right and the school district was decent and the neighbors left him alone. It wasn't much. He knew that. But he'd painted the walls himself, replaced the flooring one room at a time, put in a garden along the back fence that Mia mostly used as a place to dig holes for reasons she never explained. It was his, and it was hers, and that was enough. He was 3 turns into tightening the joint when the knock came. Loud, deliberate, not like someone who was lost. Logan checked the time on his phone, 10:22 p.m., and didn't move for a moment. Nobody knocked on his door at 10:30 on a Wednesday night. His crew didn't stop by unannounced. His neighbors were elderly and in bed by 8. His mother lived 4 hours away and called before she did anything. The knock came again. He pulled himself out from under the sink, wiped his hands on the rag he kept tucked in his back pocket, and walked to the front door. He didn't turn on the porch light right away. He looked through the peephole first. There was a woman standing on his front step. She was drenched. That was the first thing he noticed, soaked from the rain in a way that suggested she'd been out in it for longer than a walk from a car parked at the curb. Her hair was dark and plastered to the sides of her face. She was wearing a coat that even through the distorted lens of a peephole looked expensive, the kind of fabric that didn't look right wet. She had a bag over one shoulder, designer, he'd figure out later, and she was standing very straight despite everything. She didn't look scared, she looked impatient. Logan turned on the porch light and opened the door. She was younger than he'd expected, early 30s maybe, with sharp features and dark eyes that were currently doing a quick clinical sweep of him from work boots to the rag sticking out of his pocket. She had the look of someone who assessed things quickly and rarely revised her first opinion. "Logan Reed," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah. My name is Ava Sinclair." She paused, as if expecting the name to land somewhere. "I'm sorry for the hour. I need to speak with you." Logan leaned against the doorframe. The rain was coming down hard behind her, hammering the narrow concrete walkway, bouncing off the hood of his truck parked at the curb. She hadn't moved to get out of it. She was just standing there, water running off the hem of her coat. "I don't know you," he said. "No, you don't. But I know quite a bit about you." She shifted the bag on her shoulder. "May I come in?" "Not until you tell me what this is about." Something moved across her face, a flicker of something that wasn't quite annoyance and wasn't quite embarrassment. She looked like a person who didn't spend a lot of time standing in the rain waiting to be led into places. "I have a proposal for you," she said. "A business proposal. It's better discussed inside." "It's almost 10:30. I'm aware of the time. I've got a kid asleep in the back. I won't be long." Logan looked at her for another moment. He wasn't afraid of her. She was clearly not a physical threat, and he was 10 inches taller and 100 pounds heavier. But there was something about the situation that made him want to proceed carefully. A woman he'd never met, showing up at his door in the rain with his name already in her mouth. "5 minutes," he said, and stepped back from the door. She walked in and stood just inside the entry, and Logan closed the door against the wind. He didn't invite her further. She looked around the small entry. The hooks on the wall with Mia's backpack and a collection of jackets, the pair of muddy boots by the mat, the crayon drawing taped to the wall at child height that said, "My house," in uneven letters. "You can say what you need to say from there," Logan told her. She turned back to him. Whatever she'd been reading in the room, she tucked it away. "I'm going to be direct with you," she said. "Good. I want to have a child." She held his gaze while she said it, the way someone does when they've practiced delivering a line and are watching carefully for the reaction. "I'm 30 years old. I've built my company over the past 8 years, and I've deliberately postponed the question of family. But I've reached a point where I'm no longer willing to postpone it. I've decided I want a child. Biologically." A pause. "I need a partner for that." Logan stared at her. She continued before he could speak. "I've been thorough. I hired a research firm, discreetly, to identify candidates. You were selected based on several criteria: your health history, your genetic background, your character as it could be assessed from public and semi-public records, your work ethic." She pulled the bag off her shoulder and opened it. "I have a document here that outlines the arrangement. You would be compensated generously. There would be a legal agreement ensuring you had no paternal obligations or liabilities. All medical procedures would be—" "Stop," Logan said. She stopped. He looked at her. He looked at the folder she'd started to pull from the bag. He looked back at her face, which was doing that careful, watchful thing. "Get out of my house," he said. The folder paused halfway out of the bag. "Mr. Reed," I said, "get out." His voice was flat, not angry. He was past angry, landing somewhere colder. "You came to my home. You knocked on my door after 10 o'clock at night. You stood in my rain and waited to be let in, and then you stood in my entry and told me you want to use me to make a baby like you're ordering something off a menu." He shook his head once. "I don't know what kind of people you deal with who would hear that and say yes, but I'm not one of them." Ava Sinclair did not look flustered. She looked like someone doing rapid, silent recalculation. "The compensation is substantial," she said. "Enough to—" "I don't care." "If you'd read the document—" "Get out of my house," Logan said again, "before I say something worse." There was a silence, not a comfortable one. Then Ava Sinclair put the folder back in her bag, closed the clasp, and looked at him. Just looked. Something in her expression shifted, small, almost invisible. But Logan caught it. Not defeat exactly. Something older than that. "I'll let myself out," she said quietly. She opened the door and walked back out into the rain. Logan stood in his entry and listened to the sound of the storm until he heard a car engine start up somewhere down the block. Then he locked the door and stood there a little longer, one hand still on the deadbolt. He went back to the kitchen sink. He didn't sleep well that night. He didn't tell anyone about it. What would he have said? A billionaire knocked on my door and asked me to father her child? His crew would have had something to say about that, and none of it would have been useful. His buddy Marcus, who worked the same sites and had opinions about everything, would have turned it into a story he told at every bar in a 3-mile radius. Logan kept it to himself. He went to work the next morning like any other morning. The site was a mixed-use development on the north side of the city. Luxury condos on the upper floors, retail ground level, the kind of project that Logan had complicated feelings about but which paid well and kept his team employed. He supervised 2 crews, managed materials delivery, argued with the general contractor about a framing issue that had been pushed back 3 times, and by 4 in the afternoon he'd mostly stopped thinking about the woman in the expensive coat. Mostly. It wasn't that she'd unsettled him exactly. It was more that the whole thing sat wrong. Not the offer itself, which was strange and presumptuous, and he'd filed it under people with too much money and too little awareness, but something around the edges of it. The way she'd stood in the rain without seeming to notice it. The way she'd pulled out that folder like she'd done everything right and couldn't understand why it wasn't working, like she genuinely hadn't known what was wrong with it. He picked Mia up from after-school care at 5:30. She was in the middle of explaining a disagreement with her best friend about which crayon color was the best color when Logan realized he'd missed most of what she'd said. "Sorry," he said. "Say that again." Mia studied him from the back seat. She had a way of looking at him sometimes that was too old for her face. "You're not listening." "I'm listening now." "That's different." "You're right. What color?" "Violet, obviously." "Obviously," he agreed. She looked satisfied and went back to eating the crackers from her snack bag, and Logan drove home through the gray afternoon and tried to leave the previous night in the previous night. The woman came back 4 days later. Not at night this time. It was a Saturday afternoon, around 2 o'clock, and Logan was in the driveway trying to get the rear brake pads on his truck changed before the rain that was threatening on the horizon actually arrived. He heard a car pull up and didn't look right away. He was lying on a mechanic's creeper under the rear axle, and then he heard footsteps on the driveway and looked out from under the truck and saw a pair of expensive shoes stopped a few feet away. He knew those shoes. He slid out from under the truck. Ava Sinclair looked different in daylight, still composed, still with that quality of taking up exactly the space she chose to occupy and no more. But without the rain and the drama of 10:30 at night, she looked less like a figure and more like a person. She was wearing a dark blue blazer and tailored trousers, her hair pulled back, and she was holding 2 cups of coffee from a shop Logan recognized as being 3 miles away. She held one out to him. Logan looked at the cup, then at her. He sat up, but didn't stand. "I'm not interested," he said. "I know." She kept the cup extended. "I came to apologize." He didn't take the coffee. "You don't need to." "I do." She lowered the cup slightly, but didn't pull it back. "What I did the other night was wrong. Not just the hour, the entire approach. I treated you like a resource instead of a person, and I'm sorry for that." Logan sat on the edge of the driveway with oil on his hands and looked at her. "What do you want from the apology?" he asked. "Because if this is step 2 of the same conversation, it's not. Then why are you here?" She seemed to think about that. Not like she was calculating. More like she was making herself be honest instead of strategic. "Because I don't apologize to very many people," she said. "And I've been thinking about the look on your face when I opened that folder, and I needed you to know that I understand why you reacted the way you did." Logan let that sit for a moment. He stood up and held out his hand. She looked at it, the oil smeared across the palm, and handed him the coffee anyway, which he thought said something about her. "I've got a rag in the garage," he said. "Come around." He didn't know why he let her stay. Later, when he tried to work out the logic of it, he couldn't entirely. Maybe it was the apology. Genuine apologies were rarer than people pretended, and he'd gotten good at telling the real ones from the performed ones. Maybe it was that she'd brought him coffee from a specific shop, and not whatever was nearest, which meant she'd asked someone or looked it up, which was effort. Maybe it was just that she was standing in his driveway on a Saturday afternoon, and something in the interaction had shifted and he was curious against his better judgment. She sat on an overturned crate near the garage door while he finished the brake job. He handed her a clean rag so she could set the coffee cup down without it tipping, and she thanked him and sat there and didn't say anything, which he appreciated. Most people felt the need to feel quiet. She didn't. "How'd you find me?" he asked after a while. "Research?" "The firm you hired?" "Yes. What exactly did they tell you about me?" She was quiet for a moment. "That you're 32, that you've worked in construction since you were 19. Started as a laborer, got your certifications, built up to site supervisor, and now project lead. That you own this house outright as of 2 years ago. That your wife died 4 years ago. I'm sorry. That you've been raising your daughter alone since then, and by most observable accounts, you're doing a good job of it." Logan tightened a bolt and didn't look at her. "What did they say about her mother?" It wasn't quite a question. That her name was Claire, that she was 28 when she died, that she was a teacher. Ava paused. They didn't go further than that. I didn't ask them to. Good. He reached for the torque wrench. Did they tell you why I made the list? Physical health, genetic history, work history, character assessments, which mostly meant people who knew you were asked indirect questions without knowing why. People like who? Former coworkers. A neighbor. Your daughter's school had a parent-teacher review on file. Logan sat back on his heels. You read my kid's school report. I'm thorough. She didn't sound defensive. She sounded matter-of-fact, and then her expression shifted. I know how that sounds. Do you? I do now. She looked down at the coffee cup in her hands. I've run my company since I was 22. I built it when nobody thought it would work. I learned very early that being thorough was the difference between surviving and not. That habit doesn't... She stopped. It doesn't turn off cleanly. Logan looked at her. She was staring at the garage floor, a slight tension in her jaw that she was probably unaware of. What's the company? He asked. Sinclair Group, commercial real estate and development, primarily. We also have a technology division. He'd heard the name, seen it on buildings. You've got projects in this city, he said. 3 currently. I live here part-time. She looked up. I'm based in New York, but I've been here more in the last year. He went back to the wheel. They stayed quiet for a little while, and the clouds came lower, and the air started to smell like rain that was 10 minutes out. Why do you want a kid? He asked. Not confrontationally, just as a question. She took a moment. Because I'm 30, and I've spent 8 years building something, and it's done. It's successful. It's stable, and I know exactly what the next 10 years of it look like. And I realized recently that the thing I don't have a plan for is the thing that might actually matter most. She turned the cup in her hands. I thought if I approached it the way I approach everything else, research, selection, structure, it would be manageable. How'd that work out? Something crossed her face. Not quite a smile. You threw me out in the rain. I let you stand in it for a little while first. This time she did smile, just briefly, and it changed her face more than he expected, made her look younger, a little less armored. Mia appeared in the garage doorway wearing a jacket that she'd put on over her pajama shirt because she couldn't be bothered to change. Dad, she announced, I'm hungry. We had lunch an hour ago. That was a long time ago. She noticed Ava and stopped, looked at her with the direct, assessing stare of a 6-year-old who has not yet learned that staring is rude. Who are you? Mia, Logan said. It's all right. Ava turned toward her. I'm Ava. I know your dad from work. Mia considered this. What kind of work? Construction, kind of. Buildings. My dad builds stuff, Mia said. I know. It's impressive. Mia looked at Logan. She said you're impressive. I heard. I'm still hungry. Logan stood up, joints popping, and wiped his hands on the rag. Go inside. I'll make sandwiches in a minute. He looked at Ava. You want to stay for a sandwich? He wasn't entirely sure why he asked that either. She looked at him. Weighed something. I shouldn't, she said. And then, yes, if that's all right. The sandwiches were turkey and Swiss, made on bread from the grocery store, with mustard for Logan and Mia, and none for Ava, because she didn't mention a preference, and he forgot to ask until after. They ate at the kitchen table, which had a ring stain from a coffee mug, and a crayon mark along one edge that had survived 3 attempts to scrub it out. Mia, who was normally shy around people she didn't know, had apparently decided Ava was interesting enough to interrogate. Do you have kids? She asked. No, Ava said. Do you want kids? Logan looked up from his sandwich. Ava looked at Mia with an expression he couldn't quite read. Yes, she said. I do. You should get some, Mia said, with the authority of someone who considers herself an expert on the subject. Kids are good. I'll keep that in mind. Mia bit into her sandwich and chewed thoughtfully. My dad says having me was the best thing that ever happened to him. He's right, Logan said. Don't make it weird. I'm not making it weird, I'm telling the truth. Mia looked at Ava. He cried at my kindergarten graduation. I did not. Your eyes were leaking. Ava laughed. A real one, not a polished one. And it caught her slightly off guard, Logan thought, like she hadn't meant to do it. After lunch, while Mia drifted back toward her room with her repaired tablet, Logan stood at the sink washing the plates and Ava stood near the table, and neither of them pretended this was a normal afternoon. She's great, Ava said. Yeah. He turned the water off. She's the whole thing. Ava nodded, looking at the doorway Mia had disappeared through. Then she picked up her bag from the chair where she'd set it. I should go before the rain comes. Probably. She moved toward the door and then stopped, turned around. Can I ask you something? Sure. If I had come to your door and introduced myself and just asked to talk, not with the folder, not with the research firm, not at 10:30 at night. She looked at him steadily. Would you have listened? Logan thought about it honestly. I don't know. Maybe. She nodded like that was a reasonable answer. I'll let you get back to your truck, she said. Drive safe. She did. Wham. He told himself it was done after that. She'd apologized, he'd heard her out, they'd eaten sandwiches and talked like people, and that was that. Close chapter. He had a full schedule the following week. The North Side project had run into a concrete delivery delay that was going to push them back 4 days if he didn't find a solution by Monday. And Mia had a school thing on Thursday that he'd written on the fridge calendar in red marker to make sure he didn't forget. His life was full. Not in a way other people might recognize as full. There were no galas or board meetings or trips on private jets, but full in the way that mattered. Busy mornings and long work days and evenings that went by faster than he expected, and a kid who needed him to be present and paying attention. He thought about Ava Sinclair maybe twice on Sunday. Once while he was doing laundry, and once while he was on the phone with Marcus, who was complaining about the concrete delay, and whose voice Logan was mostly tuning out while he thought about something she'd said about habit not turning off cleanly. He understood that, actually. More than he'd said. She texted him Tuesday. He hadn't given her his number, which meant she'd gotten it the same way she'd gotten everything else, which was annoying and also sort of efficient. The text said, I realize I don't know what you actually do on these construction projects. I've spent most of my career on the other side of those conversations. Is the framing issue on the Kellerton project something your general contractor caused or inherited? Logan stared at his phone. Kellerton was the North Side development. The framing issue was not public information. It was an internal problem, the kind of thing that got discussed in site meetings and nowhere else. He typed back. How do you know about the Kellerton project? Her reply came quickly. Because Kellerton Development is one of my subsidiary company's clients. I got the project report this morning. I saw your name on it. Logan sat back. He typed, You own part of Kellerton? Ava, the holding company that holds the contract for the structural engineering consultation. 3 layers removed, but yes, technically. Logan, so we already work together. Kind of. Ava, 3 layers removed and you didn't know about it until just now, so I'm not sure it counts. Logan, the framing issue was inherited. Previous sub did the initial framing and was let go before completion. The GC doesn't want to admit it, because that means admitting they hired the sub in the first place. Ava, that's what I thought. I'm going to make a call. Logan, you don't have to do that. Ava, I know. I'll send you the resolution by end of week. He pocketed his phone and went back to work. She sent the resolution by Thursday. The GC had formally acknowledged the issue by Friday morning and work was back on track before the weekend. Logan texted her, How'd you do that? Ava, I talked to the right people in the right order. Logan, that's not an answer. Ava, it's the only answer. Do you want to know or do you want the problem fixed? Logan, both, ideally. Ava, most problems are solved by knowing who's actually accountable and asking them a direct question. People rarely do that. Logan, because people don't like direct questions. Ava, no, but they like accountability even less. He thought about that for a while. They talked most days after that. It started as work. She knew things about the development side of construction that he knew nothing about, and he knew things about the practical side that she'd never learned. And there was a strange usefulness to the conversations. But it widened the way conversations do when 2 people are both, it turns out, spending too much time alone. She worked 18-hour days. He'd known that vaguely, the way you know things about people like her without knowing them. But what he hadn't expected was the texture of it, the specific kind of exhaustion she described in texts sent after midnight, the way she talked about her office in New York as if it was a place where time didn't pass normally, where you looked up and it was suddenly winter, and you couldn't account for the months that had gone by. He told her about the project in a way he hadn't talked about work in a long time, about what it was like to watch a building go up from nothing, to understand every system inside the walls because you'd put them there. She asked questions that were good questions, the kind that came from actually listening. One night she called instead of texting. I was on the back porch after Mia was in bed, and he answered mostly out of surprise, and they talked for 2 hours about things that had nothing to do with construction or corporate finance. She told him about growing up in a house where success was the language people spoke to each other, where she'd learned to perform competence before she understood what it actually was. He told her about his father, who'd been a carpenter, who taught him how to read a blueprint when he was 10 years old, who died before Mia was born, and whose workbench was still in the garage under a tarp because Logan couldn't bring himself to move it. Why not? She asked. Because it's still his, he said. That sounds stupid. It doesn't sound stupid at all. She was quiet for a moment. The company I built, she said finally, when I first started it, it was in a rented space the size of a closet. I had one employee. She's still with me. She's VP of operations now. When we outgrew the space, I took a picture of it before we left. I have it in a frame in my office. A pause. People assume it's a mistake, that it's still up there. They think I'll replace it when we move to the new office. Will you? No. Because it's still yours, he said. She didn't answer right away. Yes, she said. They stayed on the phone for another 40 minutes after that. Logan didn't remember what else they said. He just remembered that it felt easy in a way that things hadn't felt easy in a long time. She came back to the house 3 weeks after the sandwich afternoon. He'd invited her, which he still wasn't entirely sure about, the thinking that led to that decision. Because Mia had a school fair on Saturday, and Logan had somehow agreed to run a ring toss booth with another parent, and he needed someone to stay with Mia while he helped set up in the morning. He should have called his neighbor, Mrs. Britton, who was reliable and available, and was paid $10 an hour to watch Mia when he needed it. Instead, he called Ava, who said yes before he finished the sentence. She showed up at 8 a.m. with juice boxes and a grocery bag that contained, she explained without much ceremony, ingredients for the chocolate chip pancakes she'd apparently read were Mia's favorite from a text he'd sent 3 weeks ago. I'm not sure I know how to make them, she said, setting the bag on the counter. You brought ingredients for something you can't make. I watched a video. That's optimistic. I'm an optimistic person. She pulled out the flour and looked at it like it was a problem to be solved. Mostly. Mia walked in, saw the grocery bag, saw Ava, and decided this was an acceptable development. Are we having pancakes? We're attempting pancakes, Logan said. Ava's going to help, Mia said, already pulling out a stool to stand on. She looks like she's good at things. She is good at things, Ava said. Mostly other things. The pancakes took 40 minutes because Ava burned the first two, and Mia had to demonstrate that you had to wait for the bubbles before you flipped, which she knew because Logan had shown her last winter, and the whole process was louder and more chaotic than Logan's Saturday mornings usually were. He drove to the school fair and ran his booth and spent 3 hours retrieving rings from the grass. And when he came home at noon, the house smelled like chocolate, and there was flour on the counter that hadn't been cleaned up yet, and Mia was showing Ava her collection of rocks from the backyard, explaining the significance of each one with great seriousness. Ava was sitting on the kitchen floor with her knees pulled up, listening like the rocks were the most important thing she'd heard all week. Logan stood in the doorway and watched this for a moment before either of them noticed him. He should have said something to himself then, some internal warning, but he was tired from the morning and the image was, it was just there, in his kitchen, 2 of them on the floor with a pile of rocks between them, and he let himself look at it too long. Dad! Mia held up a particularly large gray stone. Ava thinks this one looks like a potato. It does look like a potato, Logan said. It looks like a badger, Mia insisted. Show me the badger, Ava said. Right here, Mia pointed. These are the ears. Oh, Ava said. Okay, I see it now. Definitely a badger. You're just saying that, Mia told her. I changed my mind. It's a badger. You can't change your mind. I just did. Mia considered this. Fine, she said, but it's still not a potato. Logan went to clean up the flour on the counter and said nothing. She had dinner with them that night, and the following Saturday. And then it became a thing, without anyone saying it was a thing, She appeared, sometimes with groceries and sometimes with work stress, still tightening her jaw, and she sat at the table that had the ring stain and the crayon mark, and she ate whatever Logan made and helped Mia with homework. She didn't entirely understand and stayed until Mia was in bed. After, she and Logan would sit on the back porch or at the kitchen table and talk, or sometimes not talk, and Logan told himself it was fine. It was just people spending time together. It didn't need to be analyzed. But things had started to shift, and he knew it even when he wasn't saying it. He noticed things. The way she set down her phone when Mia was talking, every time, without being asked. The way she'd started keeping a mental list of what Mia liked and didn't like, not to perform knowing, but because she genuinely learned it. The way she looked when she came through the door on a bad day, when something at work had gone wrong, and how fast Mia's voice got her to drop the tension in her shoulders. He noticed how Ava was around the house. Not comfortable, exactly. Not yet, but wanting to be. She had the habit of people who were used to having everything serviced and managed. She didn't automatically reach for a dish to wash or a jacket to hang up. But she was learning. He watched her notice things and correct herself, and he knew what that kind of paying attention cost. He also knew she was still carrying something. She'd mentioned the accident twice, once obliquely, once not at all, just a pause in a conversation where a word should have been. Something that had happened years ago. Something that had left marks. He hadn't asked directly because she hadn't offered it, and he knew how that went, knew the difference between someone ready to talk and someone bracing against it. He knew it because he did the same thing. They were careful around each other in that particular way. Not dishonest, just slow. But the house was too small to stay slow in forever. It was a Wednesday, 5 weeks after the Saturday with the pancakes, and Logan was late picking up Mia because a materials delivery had gone wrong at the end of the day, and by the time he got to the after-school care, the staff was starting to worry. Mia had waited. She was sitting on the front steps of the building with her backpack on her lap, and when she saw Logan's truck, she got up and walked to the curb without running, which was the specific kind of not running that meant she'd been crying recently and was trying not to show it. He got out and crouched down to her level. "Hey, I'm sorry I'm late." "It's okay," she said, in the voice that meant it was not entirely okay. "The delivery was messed up. I couldn't leave." He looked at her face. "You okay?" She shrugged, put her arms around his neck. He picked her up and held her for a minute, standing on the sidewalk in front of the school, and she let him. "Is Ava coming tonight?" she asked, against his shoulder. "I don't know, Bug. I didn't ask her." "Can we ask her?" He put her in the truck and texted Ava one-handed while he buckled the seatbelt. "Mia had a hard afternoon. We're heading home. No pressure, but she asked about you." The reply came before he'd started the engine. "I'll bring food. 20 minutes." She brought Thai food in paper bags that made the car smell incredible, and she sat between Mia and the armrest of the couch because Mia had arranged it that way, and they watched a movie about a dog who finds its way home, while Logan made sure the kitchen was clean, and then he came and sat on the other side of Mia, and Mia fell asleep somewhere in the last third of the movie with her head tipped sideways against Ava's arm. Neither of them moved for a while. "She asked for you," Logan said quietly, so he wouldn't wake Mia. "I know." Ava was looking down at the top of Mia's head. Her expression was something Logan hadn't seen before. "I don't know what to do with that." "What do you mean?" "I mean—" She stopped, breathed out. "I've been careful my whole life to not let things matter too much, because things that matter can be taken. And She looked up at him, and her eyes were doing something he hadn't seen, something real and unguarded. "I don't know how to do this carefully." Logan looked at her. "I don't think carefully is the right tool for this," he said. She didn't say anything else. They sat there, Mia asleep between them, the movie credits running, the room quiet except for the sound of cars on the street outside. And Logan thought, this is already something. He just hadn't figured out yet whether that was terrifying or not. The thing about realizing something is already something is that you can't unrealize it. Logan tried anyway. He told himself the same things he'd been telling himself for weeks. That this was unusual but not complicated. That two adults could spend time together without it becoming a problem. That Mia liked her and that was fine. Kids liked people. That didn't mean anything needed to change. He ran through the logic of it on his commute to the site. In the shower. In the small window before sleep, when his brain wouldn't stay quiet. The logic held up fine on paper. It just didn't hold up around her. She called on a Thursday night around 9, which had become a regular enough thing that he answered without thinking about it. She was between meetings. She said it the way people who live in offices say it, like between meetings is just a permanent condition, like weather. Are you actually eating dinner, or did you skip it again? He said instead of hello. I had something at 4. That's not dinner, that's a snack. It was a substantial snack. What was it? A pause. Half a sandwich and some almonds. Logan leaned back in his chair. Ava. I was in a due diligence review until 8:30. There wasn't time. There's always time to eat. You make time. That's very easy to say from a house where someone cooks dinner. I cook dinner because I have a kid who needs to eat on a schedule. Before Mia, I ate standing over the sink half the time. That's disgusting. That's being 26 and single. She laughed, and he heard her moving, probably crossing whatever office she was in, probably to the window because she'd mentioned once that she thought better standing near windows. How's the Kellerton site? Good. The framing passed inspection this morning, so we're back on schedule. Your call last month fixed what would have been a 3-week delay. You fixed it. I just pointed at the person who needed to feel uncomfortable. That's most of management. 70%, roughly. Another pause, and her voice shifted slightly. Not much, just a degree. How's Mia? Good. She's got a thing at school tomorrow, some kind of book character parade. She decided she wants to go as the rabbit from a book I've never heard of, so I've been safety pinning ears onto a headband for the last hour. Are they good ears? They look like a rabbit if you don't look too close. That's the standard. He looked down at the headband in his lap. Gray felt ears slightly uneven. She asked if you were coming. There was a small silence. To the parade? Yeah. He hadn't meant to say it. It had just come out, the way things did when the call had been going long enough that he stopped monitoring what he said. I have a 7 a.m., she said. I know. I told her you were probably busy. What time is the parade? 8:30. Another silence. Longer this time. I can move the 7, she said. You don't have to do that. Logan. She said his name in a flat, specific way. I know I don't have to. Do you want me there? He sat with the uneven rabbit ears in his hands and said, Yeah, I do. Then I'll be there. She was there at 8:15, standing at the edge of the school courtyard in a blazer she'd swapped for a jacket, because Logan had told her it was an outdoor thing and the morning was cold. She'd brought coffee, 2 cups, his order without asking, and she handed his over without ceremony, and they stood together at the rope line while the kids filed out in their costumes. Mia came out as the rabbit. The ears were slightly lopsided, and one of the safety pins had shifted, so the left ear drooped at an angle that was more droopy dog than rabbit, but Mia's face when she spotted them both at the rope was worth every minute of the safety pinning. She waved with both arms. Logan waved back. Ava raised her coffee cup. The ears look great, Ava said quietly to Logan. They look like a rabbit who had a rough night. That's character. Mia parroted past them twice, once in the main loop, once because the teacher let the kids go again if their families were still watching. And after it was done, and Logan was signing the pickup sheet so she could go back inside, Mia grabbed Ava's hand with both of hers and said, very seriously, Did you see me? I saw you, Ava said. You were the best rabbit out there. There were 3 other rabbits. You were the best one. Mia considered this with appropriate gravity. I know, she said, and went back inside. Ava watched her go. Something moved across her face. That particular thing Logan had started to recognize, the one that appeared when Mia did something that caught her off guard, like she'd been prepared for the kid and kept getting surprised by her anyway. Thank you for coming, Logan said. Don't thank me. She picked up her coffee. I wanted to. They walked back to the parking lot together, and it should have felt awkward. 2 people in a parking lot at 8:40 on a Friday who weren't quite anything yet. But it didn't. She stopped at her car and turned to him and said she had 3 calls before noon, and he told her the concrete pour was happening today, and he'd probably be on site until 6, and they talked about their days like people who are going to talk again at the end of them. When she drove away, Logan stood by his truck for a moment. He wasn't running through logic anymore. He'd stopped somewhere between the rabbit ears and the parking lot. It was Marcus who said it first, because Marcus said everything first and with no particular sensitivity to timing. They were eating lunch on the tailgate of Logan's truck a week later, and Logan had made the mistake of mentioning that he'd had company over on Saturday. And Marcus, who had the instincts of someone who could smell an understatement from 3 job sites away, had stopped eating his sandwich and given Logan a very specific look. Company, Marcus repeated. Yeah, like a woman company. I didn't say that. You also didn't say it wasn't a woman. Marcus put down his sandwich. He was Logan's age, broad-shouldered, with the permanently skeptical expression of someone who'd known Logan long enough to see through most of his deflections. Is this the same company that's been fixing problems on our site from 3 corporate layers up? Logan looked at the middle distance. Logan, it's not a thing. You just made the face of a man who is lying to both of us. I didn't make a face. You made the face you make when you know something's true and you're not ready to say it out loud yet. Marcus picked his sandwich back up. Who is she? Logan told him. The short version. The door, the offer, the apology, the weeks of talking, the school parade. He kept his voice neutral and factual, which worked for most of it, but not the part about the school parade, and Marcus heard the part that wasn't neutral and pointed at him. You're done, Marcus said. I'm not. You are so done, man. You went to a 6-year-old's rabbit parade for this woman. I went for Mia. She asked if the woman was coming. You called her to tell her. That's not for Mia. Marcus shook his head, not unkindly. That's you. Logan ate the rest of his lunch without saying anything, which Marcus understood well enough to not push. That night he called Ava. He didn't say what Marcus had said. He just called, and she picked up on the second ring, and they talked, and somewhere around the 40-minute mark he thought, Marcus is right. He just wasn't sure what to do about it yet. What he didn't know, because she hadn't told him, was what she'd been carrying since before she ever knocked on his door. The accident had happened 7 years ago. She'd been 23, not long out of school, still in the early, brutal stretch of building the company on almost no money and too much stubbornness. She'd been in a car on the interstate at night, coming back from a site visit, when a truck in the adjacent lane had blown a tire and overcorrected. The impact had sent her car into the guardrail and down an embankment. She'd spent 11 days in the hospital. The physical damage had healed. Most of it. The part that had not healed, the part the doctors had told her carefully, in the kind of language people use when they're managing bad news, was something internal. Damage to the tissue that the body doesn't rebuild. The kind of thing that wouldn't necessarily matter, they said, until it did. Until she decided she wanted a child. She'd known for years. She'd filed it away in the same place she filed everything she couldn't solve yet. In a compartment, closed, attended to logically when logic applied. She'd seen specialists. She'd gotten second opinions. The language shifted, but the core of it stayed the same. Possible, but uncertain. The window was not guaranteed to stay open, which was why, at 30, she'd opened a folder and hired a research firm and made a list. She hadn't told Logan any of this. She told him on a night in late November when the temperature had dropped fast, and they were both on the back porch wrapped in jackets, and Mia had been asleep for an hour, and the conversation had been easy until it wasn't. He'd asked, finally, directly, because enough time had passed that the question needed asking, about the accident she'd mentioned twice and never explained. She told him. All of it. The interstate, the embankment, the 11 days, the doctors, and their careful language. The years of knowing and not knowing what it meant. The decision she'd made at 30 about the window and the research firm and the list. Logan listened without interrupting. When she was done, the porch was quiet except for the wind in the bare branches of the tree along the back fence. That's why you came to my door, he said. Yes. And the research, the folder. Yes. She was looking at the fence, not at him. I know how it looked. It looked like you were scared. She turned her head. Not of me, he said. Of running out of time. Of the window. He looked at her steadily. That doesn't make it less strange. But it's different from what I thought it was. Ava was quiet for a moment. What did you think it was? Honestly, I thought it was someone who'd never been told no and didn't understand why she should be. That's also true, she said. Both things can be true. Yeah, he exhaled. Yeah, they can. The wind moved again. A car passed on the street beyond the house. I was going to tell you eventually, she said. I know. But I needed you to know me a little first, before the accident was how you understood me. He thought about that. I get that. She turned to face him fully. Her jaw was tight in that specific way. The physical tell she had when she was being honest, and it cost something. I'm not telling you this because I want to revisit the conversation we had at your door in the rain. I'm telling you because you asked me a real question and you deserved an honest answer. A pause. Whatever this is between us, I'm not treating it as a means to an end. I need you to know that. Logan looked at her for a long moment. I know, he said. Do you? Yeah. He said it simply, without qualification. I know. She let out a breath she'd been holding since before she'd started talking. He saw it happen. The shoulders dropping a fraction, the jaw releasing. Not relief exactly. More like the specific kind of tired that comes after you've been braced for a long time and finally let yourself stop. He reached over and put his hand over hers on the armrest of the chair. She looked down at it. He didn't say anything else. She didn't either. They sat like that until the cold got too heavy, and they went inside. He thought about Claire more in those weeks than he had in a while. Not in the way he used to. Not the sharp, snagging grief of the first 2 years, the kind that appeared without warning, and left him standing in the middle of a grocery store aisle, not knowing how he'd gotten there. This was quieter. More like a conversation with himself about what he believed. Claire had been his whole world, and then she wasn't there. And the thing he'd learned, the thing nobody tells you and you have to figure out by surviving it, was that loving someone completely and losing them doesn't mean you stop being capable of it. It just means you know what it costs. He'd spent 4 years keeping the cost manageable, not loving anyone who could take things with them when they left. He didn't know if that was wisdom or just fear dressed up as wisdom. He and Ava didn't talk about Claire much. He'd mentioned her in pieces, the teacher, the car accident, the specific weight of raising Mia in a house that still had Claire's handwriting on a notepad in the kitchen drawer. Ava listened the same way she listened to everything important without filling the silence around it. One evening she asked him carefully, "Do you think you're ready?" They were in the kitchen, and he was doing the dishes, and Mia was doing homework at the table. The question was quiet enough that Mia didn't look up. Logan turned the water off. "For what specifically?" he said. "To stop deciding you're not." He looked at her over his shoulder. She met his gaze with that steady, undecorated directness she had. Not pushing, just asking. There was a version of Ava Sinclair that would have asked that question to get an answer she wanted. This one was asking because she genuinely didn't know. "I think so," he said. "That's not a yes." "No." He turned back to the sink. "But it's closer than it was." Mia looked up from her homework. "Are you two having a grown-up conversation?" "Yes," they both said. She looked between them, assessing. "Okay." She went back to her worksheet. "Just checking." Logan caught Ava's expression in the reflection of the kitchen window, the almost smile she had when Mia said something that was too exactly right, and he turned the water back on and thought, closer than it was might have to be enough for now. December arrived cold and gray, and with it came something Logan hadn't been paying enough attention to. He'd noticed that Ava's calls started later, that the texts came in more erratic bursts, nothing for 6 hours, then 5 rapid fire. That when she came over, she sometimes had a particular quality of tiredness that wasn't the regular end-of-day kind, but something deeper, like the tiredness of someone managing something they hadn't shared. He asked her about it on a Thursday evening, direct because that was how they'd agreed to be with each other. She took longer than usual to answer. "There's a negotiation happening," she said. "A potential acquisition. It's sensitive." "Okay." "I can't talk about the details." "I know." He paused. "But it's more than tired." She looked at him. "It's a complicated negotiation." "Is it the company? Is someone—" He chose the word carefully. "Is there a threat?" Ava looked at her hands. "There are always people who want what you've built, Logan. Most of them want to buy it. A few want to take it." She looked up. "I'm handling it." "By yourself?" "I have lawyers. I have a team." "That's not what I meant." She understood what he meant. He could see it. And she made a decision, right there. He watched it happen in the way her expression shifted. She was deciding whether to let him in. "It's not just a negotiation," she said. "Someone has been leaking internal information, someone I trusted." She said it flat, factual, but the muscle in her jaw moved once. "I don't know who yet." Logan set down his coffee. "How long has it been happening?" 3 months? Maybe more? My security team is narrowing it down. And you've been handling this the whole time I'm always handling something. Ava. Logan. Her voice was steady. This is my company. This is what I do. I don't get here because here is the only place I have where it doesn't follow me. He sat back. Let that settle. I'm not asking you to not handle it, he said. I'm asking you to tell me when something is wrong. I know you can manage it. I know you have lawyers. I'm not saying you need me to fix it. He looked at her directly. I'm saying you don't have to act like everything's fine when it isn't. Not here. She looked at him for a long moment. I'm not used to that, she said. I know. It doesn't come naturally. I know that too. He picked his coffee back up. You can practice on me. Something loosened in her face, not dissolving. She wasn't a person who dissolved, just loosening, one layer. The leak is someone senior, she said, which means it's someone who's been with me for years, which means when I find out who it is. She stopped. It's going to hurt, he said. Yes. Simple. Direct. It's going to hurt. He nodded and didn't try to fix it, because some things don't get fixed on a Thursday evening in a kitchen, and she knew that, and she'd told him anyway. That was the thing he was starting to understand about Ava Sinclair. She'd built walls the same way he'd built everything else in his life. Carefully, load-bearing, designed to last. But walls that are built to last are also built to hold weight, and she'd been holding so much for so long that the question wasn't whether she'd let him in. The question was whether she'd let herself believe that letting him in was worth the risk of what came after. He understood that question. He'd been asking himself a version of it for 4 years. He thought they were both, slowly and without making any announcements about it, arriving at the same answer. Outside, the wind moved through the tree by the back fence. The kitchen was warm, and the light was low, and Mia's homework was still spread across one end of the table, which meant she'd remember it in the morning, and it would be a whole thing, but that was morning. Tonight it was just this. 2 people on either side of a table, coffee going cold, telling each other the truth, slowly, in pieces, the only way people who've been hurt can manage. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't supposed to be. The leak was a man named David Holt. Ava found out on a Monday morning in the second week of December, sitting in a conference room on the 14th floor of the Sinclair Group's city office with her head of security and 2 lawyers, looking at a report that laid it out in clean, damning columns. David had been with her for 6 years. He was VP of Strategic Development, which meant he'd had access to everything: deal structures, acquisition targets, confidential negotiations, the internal forecasts that companies paid heavily to keep private. He'd been feeding information to a competitor for at least 8 months. She read the report twice. Then she closed the folder. Set up a meeting with him for 2 o'clock, she told her assistant. Don't tell him what it's about. The meeting took 11 minutes. She'd run through it in her head enough times that she knew her own lines before she said them. David sat across from her looking like a man who had known this day was coming and had spent months pretending it wasn't. He didn't deny it, not after the first 2 minutes, when it became clear she had everything. He tried to explain, which was worse than denying it. There were things about the company's direction he disagreed with, he said, things he felt she'd stopped listening to. Ava waited until he was done talking. You could have told me that, she said. In 6 years you could have walked into my office at any time and told me. I would have listened. You don't... He stopped himself. Say it. You don't always listen, Ava. You hear people and then you do what you were going to do anyway. She sat with that for a second. Not because it was untrue, it wasn't entirely untrue, but because the fact that it had some truth in it didn't change what he'd done with the information she'd trusted him with. You're right that I have that habit, she said finally, and I'm going to think about that. But it doesn't get you to where you went. She stood. Security will walk you out. Legal will be in touch about the NDA. He left without saying anything else. She sat in the empty conference room for about 10 minutes after, which was the version of falling apart that she allowed herself. Then she called her assistant back in, went through the afternoon schedule, and kept going. She didn't call Logan until that night. He answered on the second ring, voice a little rough. He'd been outside, she could tell, the particular quality the cold gave to his voice. Hey, how are you? I found the leak, she said. A pause. And? David Holt. The VP. 6 years. She said it once and didn't say it again because there wasn't more to say about it. Logan was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry. It's handled. That's not what I said. She closed her eyes briefly. Outside her office window. The city was doing its evening thing. The lights coming up, the traffic thinning. He said I don't listen, that I hear people and then do what I was going to do anyway. Is he right? Partly. She exhaled. That's the part that's sitting wrong. Not the betrayal. The part where I have to wonder how many times someone tried to tell me something and I walked past it. Knowing it is different from not knowing it, Logan said. Is it? Or is knowing it and not changing anything just a more sophisticated version of the same problem? It depends on what you do next. She thought about that. He did that. Gave her things to sit with rather than trying to clean up the edges for her. She'd noticed early on that he didn't comfort in the conventional way, didn't reach for the easy reassurance. He just stayed in the room. Mia okay? She asked, because she needed to be somewhere else for a moment. She's fine. She's been insisting her stuffed elephant can't sleep unless it's facing the window. We've been rearranging her bed for 40 minutes. Ava laughed, small and tired, but real. Which direction is the elephant facing now? Currently northeast. She's consulting. Keep me updated. I will. His voice shifted slightly. Come by tomorrow if you want. I'll cook. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. Come by tomorrow. She said yes. Iti. What she hadn't anticipated, what she'd underestimated, which was the honest word for it, was how much the Holt situation would knock her sideways in the weeks that followed. Not the company. The company stabilized quickly. The competitor who'd received the leaked information had gotten less than they thought. David's access had been partially sandboxed by a protocol Ava had put in place 2 years ago. A precaution she'd implemented because she trusted her instincts about risk, even when she trusted the people around her. The legal exposure was manageable. The strategic damage was limited. It was something else, something that started as a small, nagging doubt and grew in the quiet hours. David had said she didn't listen. Her security chief, in a debrief conversation about improving internal culture and flagging discontents, had said very carefully that several people felt she moved fast in ways that didn't always leave room for pushback. Her VP of operations, the woman who'd been with her from the beginning, who she trusted more than almost anyone, had said in a private lunch that sometimes people were afraid to bring her bad news because they'd seen what happened when things didn't go according to her plan. 3 different people, 3 separate conversations, the same shape underneath all of them. She was smart enough to hear a pattern. The problem was that the thing they were describing was also the thing that had built the company. The certainty. The speed. The capacity to make a decision and move without second-guessing it. Without that, she was 22 years old in a rented closet with 1 employee and a concept that 12 different investors had told her would fail. Without that, there was no Sinclair Group. But she was 30, and it was December, and she was eating dinner at a kitchen table with a ring stain on it, and she was aware that the person she'd been in that rented closet was not the same person she needed to be right now. She just wasn't sure how to do both things at once. It was Logan who found out first. He didn't mean to. He'd been at a meeting on the 19th floor of a downtown building he had no regular reason to be in. A pre-construction consultation for a new project, pulled in at the last minute because the lead supervisor had a family emergency. He didn't know the building or the client. He went in, did the consultation, shook hands, was walking out through the lobby when he ran into a man he recognized. The man's name was Carter. He ran the site management division of a company called Vantage Build, a competitor of the general contractor Logan's crew worked under. They'd crossed paths twice at industry events, talked for maybe 20 minutes total across both encounters. Carter was friendly in the way some people in the industry were, professionally warm, the kind of guy who remembered names and used them. Carter stopped him in the lobby. They talked for a few minutes about the project, about the industry generally, and then Carter said something that Logan almost missed. Tell Ava Sinclair I said nice move on the Kellerton executive track, Carter said, with a grin that assumed shared knowledge Logan didn't have. Logan looked at him. What? The VP pipeline thing, Kellerton's development division. Carter shrugged. Word gets around? Solid play, getting her guy positioned. He clapped Logan on the shoulder. Give her my regards. He walked away. Logan stood in the lobby and didn't move for a moment. He knew what Kellerton Development was. He'd been working adjacent to their projects for 2 years. He knew their VP pipeline was the fast-track path to executive development roles in their parent company, the kind of roles that paid 3 times what he currently made, that came with the kind of security and title that opened other doors. He didn't know his name was in it. He drove back to the site and spent the rest of the afternoon with the specific flat feeling that comes when something you didn't expect turns out to be true. He called her that night. Not angry yet. He was running through the possibility that Carter was wrong, that it was rumor, that there was context he didn't have. "Did you arrange a position for me in the Kellerton executive track?" he asked. The pause before her answer was a fraction too long. "There was an opportunity," she said. "A VP-level development role. You're qualified for it, and I have a relationship with their parent company. I mentioned your name. You mentioned my name without asking me. It's not a job offer yet. Ava." He stopped, tried to stay level. "Did you tell me about it?" "I was going to." "When?" Another pause. "When it was more concrete." "So you set something in motion in my career, in my name, without telling me. And you were going to let me know once it was already happening. Is that what happened or not?" He heard her breathing. "Yes." "That's what happened." He sat back. He was in his truck in the driveway because he'd come outside to make the call. Through the kitchen window he could see the light on, Mia's shadow moving past. He looked at it and tried to think clearly. "I know you meant it as a good thing," he said. "It is a good thing. The role would... I don't care what the role is." He wasn't shouting. He was past shouting, in the colder place. "You went around me. In my own life. You made a move that affects my career without asking me, and you were going to present it to me as a done deal." "I present things when they're ready. I'm not one of your things, Ava." The line went very quiet. "I know that," she said. "Do you?" "Because this is exactly what I would have expected from the woman who showed up at my door with a research folder and a plan." His voice cracked slightly. Not emotion, just honesty pushing through. "I thought we were past that. I thought the whole point was that we..." He stopped, started again. "I trusted you with my house. My kid comes to you with her rocks, and you were sitting there every night knowing you'd done this." "Logan, I'm going to go be with Mia," he said. "I'll talk to you when I can do it without saying things I'll regret." He hung up. Well, he didn't sleep well. By 3 in the morning, he was on the back porch with a jacket and a cup of coffee that had gone cold, sitting in the dark, going through it the way he always went through things, slow, methodical, trying to find the edge between what was fair and what was his own damage, adding weight to the real thing. The real thing was real. She'd arranged something in his name without asking. She'd decided she knew what was good for him and acted on it without consulting him. That wasn't interpretation. That was exactly what she'd done. But he also kept coming back to what she'd said to him once. The habit doesn't turn off cleanly. He'd seen her try. He'd watched her over these months, catch herself in the reflexes of control and stop, redirect, ask instead of tell. It wasn't easy for her. He'd seen the effort it cost, even when she didn't narrate it. She hadn't done that here. She'd seen an opportunity and arranged it the way she arranged everything, efficiently, confidently, because she was certain it was right and certain he would agree once it was in front of him. He understood the logic. He just couldn't let it stand. Because if he let it stand, then this was just a different version of the same thing. Her making a plan that he was part of without being consulted. A gentler version, sure. A version she meant kindly, but the same architecture underneath. He went back to bed at 4 and was up at 6. She called at 7:15 while he was making Mia's breakfast, and Mia was arguing with her own shoe in the hallway. He put her on speaker and set the phone on the counter. "I'm not going to defend what I did," she said without preamble. "Good. But I want you to understand something, not to make it okay, just to tell you the truth." He stirred the oatmeal. "Go ahead." "When I care about something, really care about it, my first instinct is to protect it. And the way I've always known how to protect things is to manage them, to get ahead of the problem, to put the pieces in the right places before anything can go wrong." She paused. "I do it with the company. I did it with you. I don't need to be managed." I know you don't. But Logan," he could hear her trying to get this right, "the reason I did it is the same reason I would have done anything. Because the idea of you struggling with something I could fix is something I can't sit still through." Mia appeared in the kitchen doorway, one shoe on, one in her hand. She looked at the phone on the counter and then at Logan with raised eyebrows. He shook his head slightly. Not now. Mia sat down at the table and put on her shoe with dramatic sighing, and Logan picked up the phone and took it off speaker. Here's the thing, he said, quieter. I've been struggling with things my whole life. I've been doing it without anybody managing it, and I'm fine. You're more than fine. So then you understand that I don't need someone deciding what opportunities I get to hear about. Yes. And you understand that doing it without telling me, even if it works out, even if the role is everything you think it is, that's you choosing for me. Yes. Her voice was tight. I understand. I need you to mean that, not as an apology, as something you actually change. A long silence. I heard what David said, she told him. And then I heard what 3 other people said. And then I heard what you said last night. And it's... She stopped. When she came back, her voice was different, lower, something stripped out of it. I'm afraid that if I stop controlling things, they fall apart. I've watched things fall apart. I know what it costs. She breathed. But I'm starting to see that the way I hold on costs something too. And I didn't know that until you. Logan leaned against the counter. Through the kitchen window, the morning was pale and cold, a thin frost on the windshield of his truck. I'm not going anywhere, he said. She was quiet. I'm telling you what I need you to change, he said. That's different from leaving. I'm standing here. Here, I just need you to hear me. I hear you, she said. Good. Mia looked up from her oatmeal. Is everything okay? Yeah, Bug, eat your breakfast. She gave him the look she'd inherited from nobody he could identify, that ancient, assessing look of a kid who knows more than she's supposed to. Then she went back to eating. Come over tonight, he said into the phone. We'll talk properly. Okay, Ava said. She arrived at 6 with nothing. No food, no coffee, no buffer, which he took as a sign she understood what kind of conversation this needed to be. They sat at the kitchen table after Mia's dinner, after Mia had been settled with her tablet in her room, and they talked for 2 hours. Really talked. The difficult kind, where things got said that needed to be said, and the saying of them was uncomfortable, and neither of them tried to shortcut it. She told him about the accident, all of it this time, not just the facts, but the inside of it. The fear in the hospital that she hadn't admitted to anyone. The realization somewhere in the second week that she'd been unconscious for 36 hours, and the world had continued without her, and nobody had been waiting for her in the specific way she'd needed someone to be. The way she'd come out of it with the understanding, bone deep, that the only reliable protection was the kind you built yourself. He told her about Claire, the real version, not the edited one. The marriage that had been good but also hard, because Claire had been a person with her own weight to carry, and he'd been 26 and working 60-hour weeks, and sometimes one of them was holding the whole thing, and sometimes it was the other, and there had been arguments that lasted 3 days, and reconciliations that were tender and imperfect. He told her that Claire's death hadn't just taken the person he loved, but had taken the chance to resolve everything that had been unresolved between them. And that was the specific grief he still carried. Not perfect love interrupted, but real love that hadn't finished. Ava listened to all of it. She sounds like a real person, Ava said finally. She was, he said. That's all she was. A real person. I think that's the highest thing. He looked at Ava across the kitchen table, the ring stain, the crayon mark, the 2 cups of tea he'd made that they'd both mostly ignored, and he thought about how much territory they'd covered since the night she'd stood in his doorway with a soaking wet coat and a research folder, and how none of it had been simple and all of it had been worth it. I need you to promise me something, he said. What? The next time you think you know what's best for me, ask anyway. Even if you're right, ask. She held his gaze. I promise. And if you break it, tell you, I know. Yeah. He picked up his tea. I know you know. I just wanted to say it out loud so we both heard it. She wrapped both hands around her cup. Outside, the wind had picked up, and somewhere down the street, someone's garbage can lid was scraping concrete. The house was warm in the particular way old houses get warm in winter. Not efficiently, not evenly, but thoroughly. I love you, she said. She said it the way someone says something they've been holding for a while. Not a declaration, more like a door opening, like it had been true for some time and she'd finally decided to stop pretending otherwise. Logan looked at her. I know, he said. She waited. I love you too, he said, but only because you sat on my garage floor and learned about my daughter's rocks, and because you moved the 7 a.m. meeting for a rabbit parade, and because you told me the truth about David Holt instead of pretending you were fine. He set his cup down. Not because you're trying to fix my career, not because you have a plan that I fit into, because you. Ava looked at him for a long moment. Something in her face was doing the thing, the armor coming down, one layer at a time, the way it did when she stopped managing and just existed in a room. I'm not good at this, she said. I know. He reached across the table. She put her hand in his. Neither am I. We'll be bad at it together. She laughed once, sharp and real and slightly undone, and he squeezed her hand and didn't let go. Mia's voice came from down the hallway. Dad, the elephant is facing the wrong direction again. Logan closed his eyes briefly. Northeast, he called back. Northwest, there's a difference. He looked at Ava. She was smiling, wide, unguarded, the kind she still only gave him in the kitchen when nobody was watching. Go fix the elephant, she said. He did. They got married in March. Not because it was romantic timing. March. In the city was cold and unpredictable, and the backyard still had patches of frost-killed grass from the winter. But because that was when it felt right. And they'd both spent enough time waiting for conditions to be perfect to know that conditions were never perfect. Logan proposed in the kitchen, which was where everything between them had happened anyway, with a ring he'd had sized twice because he'd asked Mia to sneak a measurement from Ava's jewelry box, and Mia had done it enthusiastically and with no discretion whatsoever. Ava had figured it out before the proposal. She'd known since the second sizing. She didn't say anything because she understood that some moments belonged to the person trying to create them, and Logan was trying, and she wasn't going to take that from him. When he asked, she said yes before he finished the sentence. You knew, he said. I did. How long? A while. He looked at the ring on her finger. And you didn't say anything. I was letting you get there. She looked up at him. You're not a fast mover. I'm deliberate. You are extremely deliberate. She said it like it was one of the things she loved about him. The ceremony was small. Logan's crew, a handful of Ava's people, the ones who had been with her long enough to feel like family rather than employees, and the neighbors who'd watched Logan raise Mia on this block for 4 years. Mia was the flower girl and took the job with the gravity it deserved, practicing the walk for 2 weeks, negotiating the dress after a lengthy discussion about whether it was too itchy. Ava's VP of Operations, a woman named Renata, who'd been with her since the beginning, cried during the vows. Ava did not cry. Logan did quietly, with no attempt to hide it, which Mia noted afterward by pointing at him and saying, his eyes leaked again, to anyone who would listen. They didn't take a traditional honeymoon. Ava had 2 projects in active acquisition, and Logan had a job in mid-build that couldn't wait, and they were both old enough to know they weren't honeymoon people. They took a long weekend up the coast instead, the 3 of them, in a rented house with a broken dishwasher and a view of the water. And Mia collected shells while Logan and Ava sat on the porch in borrowed sweaters and drank coffee and said very little. It was enough. It was more than enough. For a while, the life they built looked like it was going to hold. The Kellerton project wrapped in April, on schedule and under budget, which Logan hadn't managed on a project that size before. He got calls after that. Other developers, other GCs, word moving the way it moved in the industry. He turned down the Kellerton VP track that Ava had set in motion without him, which she accepted without argument, and he took on a project of his own. Not a crew position under someone else's contract, but a project lead with his name on the agreement. The work was harder. The responsibility was different. He liked it. Ava began making a change she'd been quietly working toward since December. It was small from the outside and significant from the inside. She started holding what she called listening hours, informal blocks of time where her team could come in without an agenda. No presentations, no proposals, just talking. Renata told her afterward that people were surprised at first, that there'd been an assumption it was a test, and then after the 3rd week they'd started actually using it. What do they say? Ava asked. Mostly things they should have told you a year ago, Renata said, but didn't. Ava nodded and didn't say anything, which Renata recognized as the specific version of Ava accepting that something was true and uncomfortable, and choosing to stay with it rather than resolve it quickly. The company continued to grow. There were hard quarters and good ones, deals that fell through and deals that landed better than projected. The world moved the way the world moved, and Ava moved with it, and Logan watched her from across tables and bedsides and the occasional construction site she visited when she was in the neighborhood, and he saw her changing. Not becoming someone different, but becoming more fully what she'd always been under the armor. And then the other thing happened. It started as an appointment. A routine follow-up with the specialist she'd been seeing since before Logan, since before the research firm and the folder and the rainstorm. She went in alone on a Tuesday morning in May, which was the kind of thing she still sometimes did, handled the medical alone, as she'd handled most difficult things alone for most of her life. She didn't tell Logan about the appointment beforehand. She told herself it was because it was routine, that she'd been to enough of these to know not to build expectations around them. She came home that evening quieter than usual. Logan was on the back porch. It was warm, finally, the kind of May evening that feels like a promise the city keeps after 6 months of cold, and Mia was in the yard chasing something, a bug, probably, or possibly just the idea of a bug. Logan had 2 beers on the railing, one of which he'd opened for Ava without knowing when she'd get there. She sat down next to him and picked up the beer and looked at the yard. "How was your day?" he said. "I had a doctor's appointment this morning." He looked at her. "You didn't say." "I know. I should have." She wrapped both hands around the bottle. The results were what they'd been building toward for a while. The specialist was clear this time. She said there are options, but she stopped, breathed through it. The likelihood of a biological pregnancy is very low. Medically, she gave it less than 15% and called that optimistic. The yard was quiet except for Mia's footsteps in the grass and the sound of the neighborhood settling into evening. "Okay," Logan said. Ava turned to look at him. "Okay?" "I mean, it's not okay. I know what this means to you." He met her eyes. "But I'm not going anywhere. That's what I mean by okay." She looked at him for a long moment. Her jaw was doing the thing. "I thought about it in the car. I went through every version of it I could think of. I ran the logic. I ran the emotional math. She stopped again. Her voice had gotten tight. "I don't know how to stop running the numbers on it." "Stop for right now," he said. "You don't have to figure it out tonight." "Logan, Ava." He reached over and put his hand on hers on the bottle. "Stop for tonight. Just be here." She looked at the yard. Mia had found the bug, or the idea of the bug, and was now narrating its imaginary behavior to herself in a low, serious voice. Ava watched her. The tightness in her jaw didn't go away all at once, but it softened, degree by degree, the way it did when she finally stopped fighting the thing she couldn't control. "She talked to a worm for 45 minutes last week," Logan said. "Did she?" "A full conversation, both sides." Ava almost smiled. "Who won?" "Unclear. I think the worm made some good points." She laughed, small and tired and genuine, and leaned her head against his shoulder for a moment. He let her. The months after were not clean. Ava had known loss. She'd known it in the hospital 7 years ago, in the recovery that had been slower and lonelier than she'd let anyone see. She'd known the specific loss of a future she'd planned, the way the accident had taken not just her health for a while, but her certainty, the feeling that she knew how her life would go. This was different. This wasn't something that had happened to her. This was something her body couldn't do, which was a distinction that felt important, and was also very hard to live with. She went through versions of grief she didn't always have names for. There were weeks when she was fine, genuinely fine, or fine enough to work and function and be present, and weeks when something small would catch her off guard, a comment at a dinner party, a photograph in a magazine, a moment in a grocery store behind a woman with a baby and a toddler, and a look of exhausted, ordinary love, and she would have to find somewhere quiet and sit with it. Logan didn't try to fix it. He'd learned, through the difficult education of loving someone who didn't want to be managed, that not fixing wasn't the same as not caring. He made dinner. He let her talk when she wanted to, and didn't push when she didn't. He told Mia, in the careful language he used for things that were real but needed to be handled gently, that Ava was going through something hard, and that the best thing they could do was just keep being there. Mia, who was 7 and in possession of instincts that were going to serve her well when she was older, walked up to Ava one evening while Ava was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold, and sat down next to her and said nothing, just sat there. After a while, she leaned her head against Ava's arm. Ava looked down at her. "You okay?" Mia asked very quietly. "Getting there," Ava said. Mia nodded like this was an acceptable answer. "My dad says sometimes things are just hard for a while." "Your dad is right about that. He's right about most things." Mia considered, but not everything. He thought the worm conversation was weird. The worm had really important stuff to say. Ava put her arm around her. Mia settled in. They sat like that until Logan came in and found them and said nothing, just went to the stove to heat up the dinner that had been sitting. It was Logan who first said the word out loud. It was a Sunday in August, and they were at the kitchen table with coffee, and the newspaper Ava still read in print because she'd never broken the habit, and Mia was in the backyard with a project involving a cardboard box and duct tape that Logan had decided not to investigate too closely. "I've been thinking about adoption," he said. Ava looked up from the paper. "Not as a replacement for what we hoped for," he said. "Not to fix anything, just as a thing I've been thinking about." He wrapped both hands around his mug. "I already know how much you can love a kid you didn't get to have from the beginning. Mia was 3 months old when Claire died, and there were people who said things to me in that first year. Not meaning to be cruel, just people said things like, 'At least you have her to hold on to,' or 'she'll grow up not knowing,' as if the loss was smaller because Mia was small. But the love wasn't smaller." Ava set down the newspaper. "It was the same size," he said. "It doesn't come from biology. It comes from showing up." She looked at him across the table, and something shifted in her face. Not sudden, not dramatic, but real. Like a weight she'd been carrying repositioning itself, not gone, but differently arranged. "You've been holding that for a while," she said. "I wanted to make sure I meant it before I said it. You're deliberate. I told you." She was quiet for a moment. Her fingers moved on the edge of the newspaper, a small, unconscious gesture. "I'm afraid," she said. "Of what, specifically?" "That I won't know how. That I'll manage instead of love. That I'll look at a child who's been through—" She stopped. "Kids who've been in the system, Logan. Kids who've been through things. I don't know if I know how to meet that." "Nobody knows until they're in it." "That's not reassuring." "No, but it's true." He looked at her steadily. "You sat on my garage floor and learned about rocks for an hour the first time you met Mia. You moved at 7 a.m. for a rabbit parade. You didn't know how to do any of that either. You just did it." She looked at him. "Think about it," he said. "That's all. Just let it sit." She nodded once, slowly. She picked up the newspaper. Outside, Mia's cardboard project made a sound that suggested partial structural collapse, and she said, "It's fine," preemptively before anyone could ask. Ava looked up from the paper. "Should we check?" She said, "It's fine." That's exactly what someone would say right before it's not fine. She's 7. She has to be allowed to have problems she solves herself. Ava considered this. "When does that start?" "I'll let you know when I figure it out." She looked back down at the paper, but the corner of her mouth had turned up slightly, and Logan saw it, and he let it be what it was. They contacted an adoption agency in September. The process was not what either of them expected, which mostly meant it was slower and more bureaucratic and more intrusive than they'd imagined. There were home studies and background checks and interviews and a mountain of paperwork, and at several points during the fall, Ava looked at Logan across a table covered in forms and said something specific that Logan later described to Marcus as the most honest thing anyone had ever said about bureaucracy. They met with a caseworker named Diane, a woman in her late 40s who had seen every kind of prospective parent and who radiated a particular professional warmth that was both genuine and very carefully managed. She asked them questions in their home visit that were personal in ways Logan hadn't fully prepared for, about their families, their histories, their expectations. She asked Ava about the accident. She asked Logan about Claire. They answered honestly. On the way out, Diane stopped at the door and looked at the kitchen table with the ring stain and the crayon mark, and at Mia's artwork taped to the wall at child height, and at Logan's father's workbench visible through the garage door that was standing open. "The kids in our system," she said, "have mostly learned not to trust the first version of something. They wait to see if the second version is the same." "That's what I did," Logan said. "When I was a kid, different circumstances, but—" Diane looked at him. Then at Ava. "You're on the list," she said. "I'll be in touch." She left. Ava looked at Logan. "What list?" "The list of people I want to call," he said, "when I have a kid who needs a good place to go." Well, winter came back, and with it came the waiting. The agency called twice about children who were possible matches. Once in November, once in January. Both times the situation changed before they got far. The November match was a sibling group they ultimately couldn't take because their home study hadn't cleared for a placement that size yet. The January match fell through when a family member stepped forward to take the child. Ava handled both better than she'd expected to. Not without feeling it. She felt both of them, especially the January one, which had gotten far enough that she'd started imagining, but without the collapse she'd been quietly bracing for. Logan noticed this and mentioned it to her once, not to praise her, but because he thought she should know she was doing something that hadn't come naturally to her. "You're getting better at sitting with uncertainty," he said. "Don't congratulate me yet," she said. "I might still fall apart." "I know. I'm just saying, you're getting better at it." She thought about it. "You don't manage well with uncertainty either," she said. "No, I think mine is better disguised." "Your disguise is work. You throw yourself into the project when you don't want to feel something." He looked at her. "When did you notice that?" "About a month in." She picked up her tea. "I just didn't say anything because I was still learning your patterns." "You were studying me." "I'm thorough." He laughed, a real one, caught off guard. "Yeah, you are." She smiled. They'd gotten good at this, at the specific ease of two people who knew each other's patterns well enough to name them and still chose to stay. It wasn't the ease of things being simple. It was the harder, more durable ease of knowing what you were dealing with. "Oh, in February," Diane called. It was a Friday afternoon and Logan was on the site and Ava was in her office, and Diane called Ava's phone first because that was the number she'd reached her on before. "I have someone I want you to meet," Diane said. "She's 4. Her name is Sophie." A pause. "She has bilateral hearing loss, moderate to severe. She communicates with a combination of speech and some sign. She's been in the system for 18 months, 2 previous placements that didn't hold. She's—" Diane stopped, which was unusual. Diane was not a person who stopped in the middle of sentences. "She's very small," she said. "And she's been waiting a long time." Ava sat very still in her office with its view of the city and its framed photograph of a rented closet. "Tell me about her," she said. Diane told her. When they were done, Ava sat for a minute and then called Logan. He picked up on the first ring. She could hear the site behind him, machinery, voices, the organized noise of something being built. "Diane called," she said. "And?" "There's a little girl." She felt her voice change on it, the way voices do when a sentence turns out to hold more weight than the words. 4 years old. Her name is Sophie." A pause. She heard the site noise diminish slightly, like he'd moved away from it. "What do you know?" he asked. She told him. The hearing loss. The 18 months in the system. The 2 placements that hadn't held. The part where Diane had stopped mid-sentence. When she was done, Logan was quiet for a moment. "Can we meet her?" he said. Diane said she can arrange it. "When?" "Whenever we're ready." Another pause. "I'm ready now," he said. Ava looked out the window at the city, at the buildings her company had helped build, and the ones still going up, the constant business of things being made and remade, the ordinary, extraordinary fact of things being built in places where there had been nothing before. "Me too," she said. The first time they met Sophie, she didn't look at them. Diane had arranged it at the agency's family room, a space designed to feel less like an office and more like a living room, which meant it had a couch with too many throw pillows, and a low table with crayons and paper and a basket of toys that had been handled by enough children to have that specific worn quality. Sophie was already in the room when they arrived, sitting on the floor near the window with a picture book open in her lap, and she didn't look up when they came in. She was small. Diane had said she was small, and Logan had pictured what small meant for a 4-year-old, and Sophie was smaller than that. She had dark hair cut straight across, just below her ears, and she was wearing a green shirt with a small stain near the collar that nobody had managed to get out, and she was holding the book with both hands with the careful grip of a child who had learned that things can be taken. Diane made the introduction, quietly, signing as she spoke. the way she'd told them Sophie preferred. Sophie looked up briefly, assessed them both in the way children do, flat and direct, and then looked back down at her book. They sat on the couch, Logan and Ava, not too close to her, not doing the thing some adults did, the big performance of enthusiasm, crouching down and getting in a child's face and doing the voice. Just sitting. The room was quiet for a while. After about 10 minutes, Mia, who they'd brought because Diane had suggested it, and because Mia had been told in advance and had taken the responsibility seriously, slid off the couch and went and sat on the floor about 3 feet from Sophie. Not right next to her, just nearby. Sophie watched her. Mia picked up a crayon from the table and a piece of paper and started drawing something with the focused concentration she brought to all artistic endeavors. She didn't say anything, she just drew. After a minute, Sophie looked at the drawing. Then she looked at Mia's face. Mia held up the paper. It was, as far as Logan could tell, either a horse or a large dog. "I'm not good at animals," Mia said. She pointed at it. "That's supposed to be a horse." Sophie looked at the drawing. Then, very small, the corner of her mouth moved. Mia pointed to the crayon box and raised her eyebrows. The universal kid gesture for, "Do you want one?" Sophie looked at the box. Then she reached out and took a brown crayon and pulled a piece of paper toward herself and started drawing. Logan and Ava sat on the couch and didn't say anything to each other. They didn't need to. Trust, with a child who has learned not to have it, is not built in afternoons. They knew this going in, and knowing it and living it were different things, and the difference was something they navigated together through the spring in ways that were not always graceful. The second visit, Sophie let Ava sit on the floor near her. The third, she took a book from Logan's hands to show him a page she liked. A picture of a deer in a forest, which she pointed at and then pointed at herself in a gesture he didn't fully understand until Diane told him later that Sophie had a thing about deer, that in her first placement there had been a yard that backed up to woods, and she'd watch deer through the fence in the mornings. He told Ava that night. She was trying to tell him something, Ava said. About herself. Yeah. A 4-year-old with 18 months of practice at not being understood still tried to tell you something. Logan was quiet for a moment. Yeah. Ava sat with that. The fourth visit? Sophie cried. Not because of anything specific, or maybe because of everything. The accumulated weight of being 4 and small and uncertain about what these people were, whether they were the same as the other ones or different, whether different meant good or just different. She cried in the corner of the room with her back to everyone, the kind of crying that didn't want an audience, and Ava, who had been watched very carefully by Diane during visits because Diane watched everyone carefully, didn't go to her immediately. She sat on the floor at a distance and waited, and when the crying slowed she moved a little closer, not touching, just near. Sophie looked at her sideways. Ava signed the word she'd been learning with a tutor for 3 weeks. Okay. She signed it in the simple version, the closed fist rocking, the question in her eyebrows. Sophie looked at the sign, then she looked at Ava's face. She shook her head. Not okay. I know, Ava said out loud, and signed what she could of it. Me too, sometimes. Sophie looked at her for a long moment. Then she shifted, just slightly, a degree closer. Not touching. Just less far. Diane caught Logan's eye across the room. She gave him nothing visible. She was too experienced to give anything visible during a session. But something in the look said, there. The placement happened in May. Not finalized. Finalization took longer, the legal machinery of it grinding at its own pace. But Sophie came to the house in May, with a bag that held everything she owned, which was not very much. And Mia had decorated the doorway with paper streamers that she'd taped up herself and which were already half falling down by the time they arrived. Sophie stood on the front step and looked at the streamers. Then she looked at Mia. Mia said very seriously, I did those myself. The tape is bad. Sophie looked back at the streamers. Then she walked inside. Logan carried her bag. Ava walked beside her, not ahead. They showed her the room, the one Logan had painted twice to get the color right, a soft green that Sophie had pointed at in a color chart at the agency 3 weeks earlier with more certainty than she showed about most things. There was a bed and a dresser and a window that faced the backyard, and on the windowsill Mia had arranged 3 of her best rocks. Sophie walked to the window and looked at the rocks. She picked up the biggest one, the gray one, the badger or potato, and turned it over in her hands. She looked up at Mia, who had appeared in the doorway. That one's the badger, Mia said. You can keep it in here if you want. Sophie looked at the rock. She set it back on the windowsill, carefully, in approximately the same place. Then she sat down on the bed. She looked at the room. She looked at the window. She didn't smile. She didn't do the thing children are supposed to do in movies, where the moment resolves into something clean. She just sat there with her hands in her lap, in the new room, in the new house, being 4 years old and trying to figure out if this one was going to hold. Logan stood in the doorway with the bag and didn't try to fill the quiet. Neither did Ava. They let her sit with it. The weeks that followed were not easy, and anyone who has loved a child carrying damage knows what that means in practice. It means the nights when Sophie woke up and was not where she expected to be. And the fear of that was bigger than the new house could immediately contain. It means Ava learning, clumsily and with effort, how to be a physical presence that felt safe rather than managed, how to sit near without closing in, how to offer without requiring a response, how to be turned away from without taking it personally. That last one was hard for her. Logan saw it happen, saw the moment Sophie would pull back from something Ava had offered, a hand, a question, a book held out, and saw the thing that moved across Ava's face, not hurt exactly, more like the effort it took to hold her ground and not retreat into the CEO version of herself, the one who dealt with rejection by getting more strategic. She held her ground. Usually. One night she came to the kitchen after Sophie was back asleep and sat down at the table and put her face in her hands and said, muffled, I don't know what I'm doing. Logan put a glass of water in front of her. Nobody does. You do. I had a 7-year head start with Mia, and I still get it wrong regularly. He sat down. Last week she told me I was doing listening wrong. What does that mean? I was looking at my phone while she talked. She was right. He wrapped his hands around his mug. This isn't a thing you know. It's a thing you keep learning. Ava lifted her face. Her eyes were tired in a way that had nothing to do with work. I keep waiting to feel like her mother, like there should be a moment when it clicks. It doesn't click. It accumulates. He looked at her. You got up at 2 a.m. and you sat on the floor outside her door until she went back to sleep. 3 nights in a row. She wasn't ready for me to come in. I know, but you were there, right outside the door, so she could hear, so she could feel you through the door. He met her eyes. That's it. That's the whole thing. That's what it is. She looked at him. It doesn't feel like enough, she said. It never does. And it always is. She sat with that for a moment. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. The tree along the back fence had come back fully in the warm weather, leaves moving slightly in the late breeze. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. He turned his palm up. The shift, when it came, was not the moment anyone would have written for it. It was a Tuesday morning in June, ordinary in every way, and Ava was making coffee. She'd learned how to use the coffee maker in Logan's kitchen, which was a manual pour-over that she'd initially described as unnecessarily complicated and had now secretly come to prefer. And Sophie came downstairs in her pajamas. She stopped at the kitchen doorway, which was her habit, stop, assess, see who was there and what was happening before committing to entering. 4-year-old calculation, running constant. Ava looked over at her. She signed, Morning. Sophie looked at the sign. She'd been signing back more in the last 2 weeks, small and unpracticed, her small hands doing the shapes carefully. She signed morning back. Then she walked to the kitchen table and climbed into the chair she'd started using as hers, and sat with her elbows on the table and watched Ava make the coffee. Ava poured the water slowly, the way Logan had shown her, the circle pour that meant the grounds bloomed evenly. She concentrated on it. She didn't perform not noticing Sophie watching. She just made the coffee. After a minute, Sophie said something, low, slightly difficult to hear. Her speech was clearest in the mornings before she'd gotten tired of the effort of it, but audible. She said, What's that smell? Ava looked up. Coffee. It's for grown-ups. It's disgusting. She made a face. Sophie looked at the pour-over. You want to smell it? Sophie considered this for a moment, the way she considered everything, with full seriousness. Then she nodded. Ava brought the carafe over and held it a careful foot from Sophie's face. Sophie leaned in and smelled it and made a face. Disgusting, she confirmed. Told you. Sophie looked at the carafe, then at Ava. My first mom made coffee, she said. It came out simple, factual, the way children say the things that cost the most. Ava held very still. She did? She said, kept her voice the same. Yeah. Sophie looked at the table. I don't remember what she smelled like, just the coffee. Ava set the carafe down. She sat in the chair next to Sophie, not across from her, just next to her. Close enough, but not too close. That's an important thing to remember, she said. Sophie looked at her sideways. Are you going to be my mom? The question landed in the kitchen and sat there, in the light and the coffee smell and the ordinary Tuesday morning. Ava looked at her, at this small, careful, stubborn, unbelievably brave child who had been asking a version of this question with her whole body for months and was now asking it with words. If you want me to be, Ava said, we can figure it out together. Sophie looked at the table for a long moment. Then she leaned over, very slightly, until her shoulder was touching Ava's arm. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. Ava looked at the kitchen wall, the artwork at child height, Mia's My House in uneven letters, and beside it now, a small drawing Sophie had made last week, a house with 4 figures in front of it, rendered in the earnest inaccuracy of a 4-year-old's hand. She'd taped it up herself without asking. Nobody had said anything about it. Ava sat very still and let herself feel the weight of the child leaning against her arm, and she thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, sitting behind a perfect desk in a perfect office, deciding that a child was a logical problem with a logical solution. And she barely recognized her. Not because she'd become someone new, because she'd become more of what she'd always been, underneath the armor and the research firms and the folders. Someone who wanted to matter to someone. Someone who wanted, in the most ordinary and essential way, to be needed. Not managed, not purchased, just needed. Sophie's shoulder against her arm was the whole answer to the question she'd never known how to ask. Logan came downstairs 20 minutes later to find his wife and his youngest daughter sitting at the kitchen table sharing a piece of toast. Ava's coffee going cold beside her, Sophie explaining something with considerable animation about a dream she'd had that involved a deer in a very large hat. He stood in the doorway. Ava looked up at him over Sophie's head. Just looked. There was nothing on her face he needed to interpret. It was all there, the whole complicated human thing of it, the grief and the luck and the effort and the love that wasn't the kind you achieved, but the kind you became. He nodded once. She nodded back. He went to the coffee maker and started another pour. The finalization happened on a Thursday in August. It was a small proceeding, family court, a judge who Logan later described as the most cheerful person he'd encountered in any government building, a stack of documents, a moment where the gavel came down and something that had been true in practice became true on paper. Sophie wore a yellow dress. Mia had strong opinions about the yellow dress, and had also worn yellow in solidarity, which Sophie had noticed and which had produced the specific expression she had when something pleased her. Not a full smile, not yet, but the edge of one, the almost. They took a photograph on the courthouse steps. Diane was there. Renata was there, standing in the back, trying not to cry and failing. Marcus was there, which Logan hadn't expected, and which meant more than he knew how to say, and Marcus didn't say anything stupid for once in his life, just put a hand on Logan's shoulder and nodded. In the photograph, Logan is holding Sophie, who is looking at the camera with the expression she used when she was deciding whether to trust something. Mia is pressed against his side with her arm around his waist. Ava is next to him, her hand in his, looking not at the camera, but at Sophie. She's looking at Sophie the way you look at something you can't quite believe is real yet. People asked them, in the months after, what it was like. The question always meant well and never quite landed right, because what it was like was everything at once, and also just Tuesday. It was Sophie learning that the house didn't change overnight, that the walls stayed the same color and the breakfast was the same, and no one's bag was packed by the door. It was Mia teaching her the rock collection system with the full earnestness of an 8-year-old passing down sacred knowledge. It was Ava sitting with a sign language tutor twice a week and coming home and practicing at the dinner table until Sophie corrected her form and then showed her the right way with the patient authority of someone who'd been doing it longer. It was Logan watching all of this from kitchens and doorways and back porches and feeling something he didn't always have the right word for. Not happiness exactly. Or not only that, more like the specific fullness of a life that had broken in multiple places and had been repaired not by replacing what was broken, but by building around it, through it, with the broken parts included. He thought about his father's workbench under the tarp in the garage. On a Saturday in September, he took the tarp off. He didn't move the workbench. He didn't change it. He cleaned it, carefully, the way his father had taught him, with the right cloth and the right product for the wood. And he left it where it was, and he put a few of his own tools on it alongside his father's, not replacing, just adding. Sophie came into the garage while he was doing it and stood at the workbench and looked at the tools. "What's this?" she signed, and said it aloud because she was doing both more now. "My dad's workbench," Logan said. He signed, "Grandfather." Then, he made things. He was good at it. Sophie looked at the tools. She pointed at a hand plane, old wooden-handled, the kind you didn't see much anymore. Logan picked it up. He showed her how it worked, the angle, the motion, the thin curl of wood it could take off a surface. He ran it once along the edge of a scrapboard, and the curl came off clean. Sophie watched this. Then she held out her hand. He gave her the plane. It was too big for her hand, too heavy, and she held it with both hands and tried the motion he'd shown her, dragging it along the board. It didn't catch right. She didn't have the angle yet. "Like this," he said, and put his hands over hers and adjusted the angle. She tried again. This time the plane caught, and a small thin curl came off the edge of the board, and Sophie looked at it like it was something remarkable, which it was. She looked up at him. He nodded. She tried it again. "Shep, there's a thing that happens to people who survive the loss of something they were counting on, and the thing is this. Eventually you stop building your life around the shape of what's missing and start building it around what's there. Not because the missing thing stops mattering, because carrying it doesn't have to mean stopping." Logan had learned this in pieces over 4 years of raising a daughter in a house that was supposed to have 2 people in it. Ava had learned it more recently, in the specific way people learn things that cost them, not through understanding, but through surviving. Sophie was still learning it. She was 4, and then 5, and she was learning it the only way a child can, by testing whether the house stayed the same, by testing whether the people in it stayed, by waking up in the night and finding that the floor was still solid, and the room was still green, and the window still faced the backyard with the tree that was losing its leaves again, because fall had come back the way fall always did. By finding, slowly, that some things stayed. Not because they were perfect, not because nothing hard had happened or would happen, but because the people in this house had decided, each of them separately and then together, that showing up was the thing. Not arriving at the right feeling on schedule, not having the right words. Just being there, in the room, hands available, eyes open. That was the whole thing. That had always been the whole thing. Oh, on a Sunday evening in October, the 4 of them were at the kitchen table. The table with the ring stain from a coffee mug Logan had set down 1,000 times without a coaster. The table with the crayon mark Mia had made at age 3, and which had survived every attempt to remove it and had simply become part of the table, part of the record of the house, and the people in it. The table where Logan had first served turkey sandwiches to a woman in a wet designer coat who didn't know she was about to change her life, where 2 people had told each other difficult truths at midnight, where a small girl had first leaned against a woman's arm and let herself be near. Mia was telling a story about something that had happened at school, a complicated social situation involving assigned seats and a disagreement about whose pencil case was whose, narrated with the detail and drama it deserved. Sophie was eating with one hand and signing along with parts of Mia's story, which she'd started doing, a kind of running simultaneous commentary that made Mia laugh and repeat things for her. Logan was eating and half listening and watching. Ava was watching too, her fork resting on her plate, and she had the expression she got at this table, not quite relaxed, because she was not a person who fully relaxed, but open, present, the armor down. She caught Logan looking at her. She raised an eyebrow. He shook his head slightly. Nothing, just looking. She picked up her fork. Mia reached the climax of the pencil case story. Sophie signed something that made Mia laugh so hard she put her face on the table. Ava reached over and tucked a piece of Sophie's hair back behind her ear without thinking about it. The automatic gesture of someone who had done it enough times that it no longer required a decision. Sophie didn't pull back. She kept eating. Outside, the tree along the back fence was going gold and red in the October way, and the light was the specific October light, low and warm and already shorter than it was last month. The neighborhood was doing its Sunday evening thing. Someone's dog, someone's television, the distant sound of a child being called in for dinner. In the kitchen, 4 people sat at a table that bore the marks of everything that had happened in this house. And they ate dinner, and they were loud, and they were imperfect, and they were exactly where they were supposed to be. Not because everything had gone according to plan. Not one single piece of it had gone according to plan. But here's the thing about plans. They're drawn up by people who don't yet know what they actually need. The woman who knocked on the wrong door in the rain thought she needed a transaction, a solution, a problem resolved through careful management. The man who answered thought he needed no one, that what he had was enough, and adding anything meant risking everything. The little girl with the hearing loss and the careful eyes and the too big bag thought no one was going to stay. They were all wrong. And being wrong, it turned out, was the best thing that ever happened to any of them. You can't plan your way to a family. You can't research it, structure it, optimize it, or put it in a folder and present it at 10:30 on a rainy night. It shows up the way most real things show up, sideways when you're not ready, looking nothing like what you expected. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you open the door anyway. Logan Reed opened his door. The rest of it was just showing up.